I was the most feared rider in 3 counties, and I had spent 9 years trying to break my own neck on the Whitmore road, when the storm handed me the one life I could not afford to lose. It was the last week of October, and the rain had come down the moor sideways since noon. Any sensible man was indoors with the shutters barred. I was not a sensible man. I was on the back of my black hunter, Corvo, driving him up the long climb toward Fen Bridge with my hat gone and my coat soaked black to the lining, because indoors was where the quiet lived, and the quiet was where I could hear my brother's voice, and I would rather have drowned on horseback than sit still and listen to it. That was the whole of my life then, if you want it plainly. I rode to keep from thinking. I took the gates no one took, and the fords no one forded, and the county called me the reckless Duke of Whitmore and crossed to the far side of the lane when they saw me coming. They were not wrong to. A man who does not care whether he lives is more dangerous than a man who wants you dead. I heard the chaise before I saw it. Over the drum of the rain and the wind tearing through the gorse there came a sound I knew in my spine before my mind named it, the flat, wrong thunder of a team run away, iron on stone with no rhythm in it, a carriage gone loose from any hand. I had heard that sound once before, on a dry summer road 9 years gone, and it had ended my brother. I have never been able to explain what it did to me to hear it again. My whole body went cold and certain at once. I put my heels to Corvo, and we went up the last of the rise at a dead gallop, and I came over the crown of the hill and saw it. A yellow postchaise, a hired thing, careering down the far slope toward the river with its 2 horses mad with terror, their heads flung and their legs going anyhow, the whole vehicle slewing side to side as if it meant to fly apart. And below it, at the bottom of the slope, was Fen Bridge, or what had been Fen Bridge. The Arn had come up over its banks in the night. The water was brown and boiling, halfway up the arches, and the near end of the bridge had already gone under, and the road simply vanished into a churning flood where the meadow had been that morning. The chaise was running straight down into it. There were 2 postboys. I saw them in the first instant, saw them clear as I will see them till I die. They had got themselves free. One was already off his horse and scrambling up the bank away from the water, and the other, even as I watched, sawed through the near trace with a knife, cut his beast loose, flung himself across its back and drove it away up the far rise, leaving the chaise and everyone in it to the river. They did not look back. Grown men, and they cut the horses free and ran, and left whoever was inside that yellow box to go into the flood alone. I have been called a great many hard things in my life, and deserved most of them. But I have never in my life cut a trace and run, and the sight of those 2 men doing it lit something in me that had been cold 9 years. I did not decide to ride down that slope. My hands and heels decided it before the thought was finished, and Corvo, God bless that black devil, he was as mad as I was, went down that streaming grade at a gallop that should have killed us both. The chaise had 1 horse still in the traces now, half dragged, half running, and the whole weight of the carriage was shoving it faster than its legs could carry it, driving it down toward the water. And in the little window of the door, white against the dark, was a face. A woman's face, not screaming. That is the thing I remember. She was not screaming and she was not frozen. She had the near door half open and was leaning out into the rain, and she had hold of the loose flapping rein of the cut-away horse, the one the postboy had abandoned, and she was hauling on it with both hands and all her weight, trying to turn the head of the horse still in harness, trying to check that carriage herself with nothing but a wet leather strap in her own 2 arms. Fighting it. Alone in a runaway chaise, 60 feet above a flood that would have swallowed the carriage whole, and she was fighting to save herself and had not wasted a breath on screaming. I have loved her from that instant. I did not know it then. I know it now. Let go of the door. I roared it as I came up alongside, Corvo flat out, the 2 of us matching the plunge of that carriage stride for stride. Get to the back, the far corner, hold the strap and let go the door. She heard me. That was a marvel in itself in that wind. Her head came round and she looked at me, one look, gray eyes, rain running off her chin. And she did not argue and did not faint, and did not do any of the things I have watched fine ladies do at a spilled teacup. She let the door swing and threw herself back into the body of the chaise and got both hands on the frame of the far window, bracing. And that was exactly right, exactly what I would have shouted next, and I had a half-second to think. She has done a hard thing before, this one. We were 40 feet from the water. I had one chance, and I knew what it was, because I had spent 9 years learning every reckless thing a horse and a man can do together, and had been waiting, I think, without knowing it, for the one moment when all that ruinous skill would be worth a single human life. The horse still in the traces was the whole trouble. Its terror was driving the carriage. If I could get it turned, get its head hauled across and up the slope, the weight of the chaise would swing after it and the whole runaway would slew off the fatal line and pile up on the hillside instead of in the river. A wreck on the grass a body could live through. The flood, no one. I took Corvo in close, close enough to feel the heat of the panicked horse, close enough that a stumble from either beast would have gone under both of us. And I leaned out of my own saddle across that howling gap and got my hand on the harness horse's cheekpiece, on the very iron of the bit, and I hauled its head round toward me and up the hill with everything I had in my arm and my shoulder and my back. For one endless moment nothing gave. The horse fought me, the carriage shoved on, the water came up. And then the head came round, and the great terrified body followed the head the way a horse always will, and the whole plunging weight of the chaise swung wide off its line, missed the drowned lip of the bridge by a length, struck the rising bank and went over. It went over slow, the way big things do. I have watched it 1,000 times since in my sleep. The near wheels lifting, the yellow box tilting up against the gray sky, and then the crash of it coming down on its side in the mud and the gorse, 30 feet from the flood, with the harness horse screaming and Corvo screaming, and the rain coming down like the end of the world. I was off my saddle before Corvo had fully stopped. I cut the traces of the downed horse first. You free the animal or it kicks the carriage to splinters and everyone in it with it. And then I was at the chaise, hauling myself up onto its side, which was now its top, wrenching at the door that faced the sky. "I'm here," I was saying, I don't know how many times. "I have you, I'm here." She was below me in the wreck, half thrown into what had been the ceiling, and she was moving, thank God. She was reaching up. I got the door open and got my arm down, and she got her hand into mine, a small hand, cold and strong, gripping like she meant it. And I pulled her up out of that ruined box into the rain, and got an arm under her, and half lifted, half fell with her down the muddy side of the chaise onto the streaming grass. And there we knelt, the two of us in the mud and the roar, both of us shaking, her soaked black hair plastered down one side of her white face and her chest heaving. And she looked at me, and the first thing she ever said to me, the very first words gasped out between breaths, were, are the horses hurt?" Not "thank you," not "who are you," not "am I safe," are the horses hurt? I have thought since that, if I had a soul left to be saved after 9 years of driving it into the ground, she saved it in that sentence. "The harness beast is winded and cut a little," I said. The other ran off sound. "You're not to think about the horses. Are you hurt? Where are you hurt?" I don't think." She pressed a hand to her own ribs, testing, and I saw her wince and then master it. She was doing to herself, I realized, exactly what a surgeon does to a patient, pressing, listening, reading the pain. "Bruised, nothing broken. The men, where are the men?" "Gone." I heard how the word came out of me, hard as a blow, and I did not soften it. "They cut the horses and ran and left you, both of them." She took that in. And this is the second thing I will never forget about Cecily Fell. She did not weep at it, and she did not rage at it. She looked up the empty rise where they had gone, and something moved through her gray eyes, not surprise. That was the terrible part, not surprise at all, only a kind of tired confirmation, as if the world had shown her its true face so many times that a pair of postboys running for their own skins was no more than she'd expected. And then she looked back at me, at the man kneeling in front of her soaked to the bone, and she said, quietly, "You didn't run." "No," I said. "You rode down that hill." She was looking at me properly now, and I watched her take in the crest and the black horse and the wreck and put it together, that a man had come down that killing slope at a gallop to reach a stranger's runaway carriage. "You might have gone into the water yourself. You might have died." "I have been trying to for 9 years," I said. I don't know why I said it. I had never said it aloud to a living creature. It came out of me there in the rain in front of a drowned, muddy, gray-eyed stranger as easily as breath, and the moment it was out I felt the cold of it, that I had told the truth, and to her. She did not flinch from it. She looked at me a long moment, the rain running down both our faces, and she said, "Then it's a mercy for you as much as me that you had somewhere to ride to today." No one had ever said anything to me like that. 9 years of people telling me to have a care, to think of the title, to think of my mother, to stop, to slow, to be sensible. And here was a woman I had known 4 minutes, sitting in the mud where I'd dropped her, telling me that saving her had perhaps been a mercy to me. As if my recklessness were not a sin to be scolded but a wound to be tended. As if she had looked straight through the wildness to the grief, underneath it, in the time it took to pull her from a wreck. "We can't stay here," I said, because I did not trust my voice to say anything truer. "The bank's coming down and it'll be dark within the hour. My house is 2 miles up the moor. Can you ride if I hold you?" "I can ride," she said, and got herself to her feet before I could help her, swayed, steadied on my arm, and lifted her chin. "I've walked worse than a fall. Your horse won't like the double weight in this." "My horse," I said, "will do exactly as he's told for once in his life, or he can explain himself to me later." And for the first time in longer than I could remember, watching a small joke pull the smallest reluctant curve into the corner of her frightened mouth, I felt something in my chest that was not grief and was not the wish to break my own neck. I did not have a name for it yet. I have one now. Her name, it turned out, Cecily. I got her up before me on Corvo. She was lighter than she should have been. I noticed even then the lightness of someone who has not eaten enough for a long while, and we went up onto the moor with the storm at our backs and Whitmore chased somewhere ahead in the murk. She sat rigid at first, holding herself away from me the way a proper woman holds herself away from a strange man. But the cold and the shaking of the reaction beat propriety in the end, and by the first mile she had let herself lean back against me, and I had my arm firm around her, and I could feel her heart still going too fast against my forearm, slowing, as the danger fell away behind us. "Whom do I have to thank," she said over her shoulder into the wind, "for not running?" "Gideon Vale," I said. And then, because she would learn it soon enough and I found I did not want her to learn it from anyone but me, "They call the estate Whitmore. I'm the Duke of it." I felt her go still against my arm. I had felt that stillness before in 100 people, the recalculation, the sudden care, the drawing back into deference or into fear. I braced for it. It did not come the way I expected. "A duke," she said, "who rides the moor alone in a flood with no groom and no sense." There was no fear in it. There was something almost like exasperation, the tone of a woman who has just realized the reckless fool she scolded is a man she is not permitted to scold. "Of course you are. Only a duke would be let run wild that long with no one able to stop him." I laughed. It cracked out of me, rusty, half a cough, the first true laugh I think I had laughed since my brother died, and Corvo's ears went back at the strange sound of it. "And whom," I said, "do I have the honor of having pulled out of a river, since you've taken my measure so quick?" Cecily fell. A pause. "I keep the still-room I kept the still-room. I'm a herb woman. I grow simples and I make remedies and I go where the sick are when they'll have me and when they can't afford the doctor, which is most of them." Another pause and then, lower, as if it cost her, "I was coming home from Marston. There's a fever in the cottages there and no one to tend it, and the chaise was the last of my money. I'd have walked but my grandmother's alone, and I'd been away 4 days already and I was afraid, so I took the chaise," and she stopped. And your two heroes cut the horses and left me to the arn. So, that's the whole of it. A herb woman who spent her last money on a chaise to hurry home to a fevered village, and a grandmother left alone. I had pulled a great many things out of the wreckage of my life over the years, and never once anything worth keeping. I understood, riding through that storm with her heartbeat slowing under my arm, that I had at last got hold of something I was not going to let the flood have. Your grandmother, I said. Where? Nethercote, the old still-room cottage on the edge of your land, if you must know. She said it a little defiantly, as if she expected me to object to a herb woman squatting on the fringe of the ducal estate. My grandmother was still-room mistress at the Chase 40 years ago, before your time, before your father's, near enough. When she was pensioned off, they let her keep the cottage. She's near blind now. I look after her. That's why I couldn't. She stopped again. She was not a woman who explained herself easily. I could hear how each admission was pulled out of her against the grain. Then we send word to Nethercote tonight that you're safe and warm at the Chase and will be home tomorrow, I said. And we don't let you take one more step in this weather with cracked ribs. You'll dry out under my roof and eat a proper dinner and sleep in a proper bed. And in the morning I'll drive you home myself and go on to your fevered village and see what's wanted there. She twisted round to look at me, and the rain had eased just enough that I could see her face clearly for the first time, not white with fright now, but flushed with cold and with something like affront. You'll do no such thing. A duke doesn't drive a herb woman about the country in his own carriage, and I don't take charity, your grace, however kindly it's dressed. It isn't charity, I said. You spent your last coin to go and nurse strangers with a fever, and it nearly killed you. And I have more horses and more money than any one man has a right to, and nothing whatever that I do with any of it means a damned thing. Let me spend some of it on the fever at Marston and on getting you home dry. It's the first useful thing I'll have done in 9 years. Don't take that from me out of pride. She was quiet a long moment. The Chase had come into view by then, its lit windows swimming gold through the last of the rain, and I felt her look at it, that great pile of stone that had swallowed my whole family and left only me rattling around in it. And then she looked back at the moor we'd crossed, and finally she said in a different voice, softer, "You keep saying 9 years. What happened 9 years ago?" And because it was dark, and because the storm made the whole world feel like a place outside of the ordinary rules, and because she had already seen the wildness and named it a wound, I told her. I had never told anyone. I told her about my brother Aubrey, who was 3 years younger than me and twice the finer man, who could ride like he'd been poured onto a horse, and how the two of us had raced everything and everyone and each other from the time we could sit a pony, and how one bright dry morning 9 years ago I had dared him. I, the elder, who should have known better, dared him to take the water jump at the bottom of Kell's field at a gallop, the one everyone said couldn't be taken. And how he had laughed and put his heels in and gone for it to prove me both right and a fool, and how his horse had caught the far lip and gone down, and how I had reached him a minute later and he was already gone. 19 years old, on a dare, from me. So I ride, I finished. The words came steadier than I'd have believed. I take the jumps he'd have taken, and the fords no one fords, and I go too fast on the moor in a flood. And everyone thinks I've gone reckless from grief, and they're half right, but it isn't only grief. It's that if I'm going to be the brother who lived, the one who dared him onto that horse, then it never seemed right somehow that I should take any more care of my own neck than I took of his. Do you understand? It seemed only fair that the road should be able to have me too, any day it liked. We had reached the courtyard. The rain drummed on the cobbles. Cecily Fell sat before me on my horse and was silent, and I thought I had frightened her at last, or disgusted her, this stranger, with the whole ugly weight of it. Then she said, "My grandmother has a saying. When someone can't forgive themselves, she says they've mistaken the sentence for the crime, that the punishing goes on and does no good to anyone, least of all the dead, because the dead don't want it. They never want it." She turned, and in the lantern light from the door her gray eyes were very steady and very kind and not one bit soft. Your brother, from everything you've said, a boy who laughed and put his heels in to prove you a fool. Does he sound to you, Your Grace, like a boy who would want his brother to spend 9 years riding into rivers hopping to join him? Or does he sound like a boy who'd cuff you round the head and tell you to stop being a coward about being alive? I could not speak. No one in 9 years had said the one true thing to me, and here it was, said in a courtyard in the rain by a soaked herb woman with cracked ribs whom I'd known 1 hour, and it went into me like the first breath after being long under water. That's cruel, I managed. It's not cruel, she said, and now, at last, her voice did soften just at the edges. Cruel would be letting you go on. I've watched too many people die, Your Grace, to have any patience with the living throwing themselves away. Now help me down before I fall down, because I've reached the very end of what I can pretend, and I think your dinner had better include a great deal of it, because I can't remember when I last ate. I lifted her down. She stood in the rain a moment with her hand on my arm, and then her legs went, the whole day's terror and cold and hunger claiming their price all at once, and I caught her up before she reached the ground and carried her in out of the storm, and she did not protest it, and that, I think, was the moment the rest of my life began. They put her in the blue room, and Mrs. Aldous, my housekeeper, who had known me since I was in leading strings and had watched me try to kill myself for 9 years with a grief that matched my own, took one look at the drowned girl in my arms and one look at my face, and I am told, went straight to her own room afterward and wept, though she never said why and I never asked. Cecily slept the clock round. I sent a boy to Nethercote in the last of the light with word that she was safe. I sent another rider before dawn to Marston with money and orders to fetch the apothecary from Harbrook to the fevered cottages whatever it cost, and to say a herb woman named Fell would come as soon as she was able. And then I did a thing I had not done in 9 years, which was to go to bed at a sensible hour, in a dry house, having ridden that day not to lose my life but to save one. And I lay awake a long time, not with grief but with the strangest lightness, as if a great stone I'd carried so long I'd forgotten its weight had been lifted a half-inch off my chest, just enough to feel where it had been. She woke near noon, and I had them bring her broth and bread and a great deal of it, as ordered, and I did not go up, because a duke does not sit at the bedside of a strange young woman, whatever the storm had thrown them through together. I waited in the library like a boy waiting on a summons, and pretended to read, and read the same page 11 times. She came down herself in the afternoon, in a gown of Mrs. Aldis's making that was too big for her, moving carefully because of the ribs but moving, her dark hair dried and pinned, and she stood in the library door and looked at me sitting there with my useless book and said, "You saved my life, and I've slept in your best bed and eaten half your larder, and I don't even know if you take your tea with sugar. This is a very improper household, Your Grace." "Wildly improper," I agreed. "Sit down before you fall down. How are the ribs?" "Bruised, not broken. I've bound them." She sat, wincing, arranging herself with the economy of someone who has learned to live inside a body that hurts. "Your Mrs. Aldis tells me you sent to Marston at dawn, the apothecary from Harbrook, and money for the medicines, and word that I'd come." She looked at me. "That's a great deal of trouble and expense for a village that isn't yours and a fever that isn't your concern." "It's my concern now," I said. "Why?" And I could have made her a graceful answer, some duke's answer about noblesse and duty. But she had told me the true thing in the courtyard, and I found I could not tell her anything but true things any more. "Because you spent your last coin on it," I said, "and nearly drowned for it, and I've spent 9 years spending everything I have on nothing at all. Because it turns out I would rather spend it on what you'd have spent your last coin on. I don't have a grander reason than that. I've watched you be braver about a runaway carriage and cracked ribs, and a pair of cowards who left you to die than I have been about anything at all in 9 years, and I find I want to be on the side of the things you're brave about. That's the whole of it." She was quiet. She looked down at her own hands, still woman's hands, marked with old burns and stains, strong and plain and capable, and she said without looking up, "You mustn't say things like that to me, Your Grace." "Why not?" "Because I'm a herb woman with a blind grandmother and a cottage on your charity, and you're the Duke of Whitmore, and things like that, said by men like you to women like me, only ever mean one thing, and it isn't a thing I'll be to any man, duke or no." She lifted her chin and made herself meet my eyes, and there was steel in it, and under the steel I saw a very old hurt. I've had that offer before, from a man who thought a poor woman with clever hands was a bargain. I broke his nose. "I'll not break yours, out of gratitude for the river, but I'll thank you not to make me want to." I stood up. I crossed the room, and I did not touch her. I want that understood. I would sooner have cut off my hand. I stood a proper arm's length off, and I said, "Cecily Fell, I have known you not quite one day. I know that you fight a runaway carriage instead of screaming, and ask after the horses before yourself, and spend your last coin on strangers, and tell a duke the truth about his dead brother in a courtyard in the rain when no one in 9 years has had the courage to. I have not the smallest idea what you are to me yet, but I know it is not the thing that man offered you, and I know it is not nothing, and I know that when you are well and gone home, I am going to feel the lack of you in this house like a lack of light. And I say that to you plainly and at a proper distance and with no offer in it at all except this one. Let me drive you home tomorrow, and let me be of use to your fever at Marston, and let me see you again. As a man is permitted to see a woman he admires, nothing more and nothing less, and no shame in it. Will you allow that much?" She looked at me for a long moment, and then Cecily Fell, who had cracked ribs and no dowry and a broken man's nose to her name and more courage than any 3 lords I've known, said, "You may drive me home, and you may see me again, and if you make me regret trusting a reckless duke, I'll set my grandmother on you, and she's blinder and meaner than any magistrate in the county." And the corner of her mouth curved at last, the reluctant curve I'd seen in the rain, and this time she let it become a smile. I will not pretend it was easy after that, or quick, because it was neither, and Cecily would call me a liar to my face if I dressed it up. I drove her home the next morning, and Nethercote turned out to be a low stone cottage with a garden gone to autumn ruin, and inside it the fiercest small blind woman I have ever met, Cecily's grandmother, who I later learned was called Mother Fell by half the county and Bess by no one living. She turned her clouded eyes toward the sound of a duke's boots on her threshold and said, before I'd got a word out, "So, you're the boy who's been riding into the Arn on purpose these 9 years. I'm surprised at you, and I'm obliged to you for my girl. Sit down, you're blocking my fire's heat, and don't you dare pity me for the eyes, I see plenty." I sat. I have sat at the tables of princes, and I was never so thoroughly put in my place, nor so glad of it. I went on to Marston that day and found the fever worse than they'd said, and the people frightened and the parson useless. And I did what money and a duke's word could do, got the Harbrook apothecary properly paid and lodged, got clean straw and coal and broth into the worst cottages, and stood out of the way while Cecily, who would not be kept home another day, ribs and all, moved through those sick rooms like she'd been made for them. And I watched her, and I carried water, and I learned to be useful. It is a strange thing for a man to learn at 33 how to be useful, and stranger still to find that he likes it better than any wild ride he ever took. The fever broke by the week's end, and only one old man was lost, who'd have been lost anyway, and Cecily wept over him for exactly as long as she allowed herself and no longer, and then went and washed and laid him out with her own hands because there was no one else who would, and I stood in the door of that cottage, and understood that I was watching the bravest person I had ever known do the hardest ordinary work in the world, unpaid, unthanked, because it was in front of her and needed doing, and that I would have given the whole of Whitmore and every horse in its stables to be worthy of standing in that doorway. I did not go too fast on the moor any more. I noticed it without deciding it. I found I had somewhere to arrive. My aunt noticed, of course. Aunts always do. Lady Marisdale was my late father's sister, and had been trying to marry me off respectably since the year my brother died, on the reasonable theory that a wife and an heir would settle me and save the title from my neck. She had a candidate always at the ready. That autumn it was a Miss Hartwell, a perfectly pleasant young woman with 12,000 pounds and a father with coal under his land. And when my aunt descended on the chase in November and heard from the servants' hall that his grace had spent a fortnight fetching and carrying for a herb woman and her blind grandmother and a village of fever, she came to me white about the mouth. "A herb woman, Gideon, a herb woman, do you know what is being said?" "That I've finally found something worth doing with myself," I said. "I hope so, it's true." "That you're making a spectacle, that the Duke of Whitmore is playing potboy to some grubbing cottage witch who fell into a ditch and had the wit to fall at your feet. She was working herself up, I let her. I have gone to a great deal of trouble over Miss Hartwell. She is suitable. She is of your rank. She will not be laughed at in London, which your cottage witch most certainly will, and which you will be laughed at for beside her. Marry Miss Hartwell, present her an heir, and go on riding into your rivers if you must, and leave the herb woman her cottage and your charity and some sense of proportion." I had spent 9 years letting Lady Marisdale scold me, because a scolded man who does not care is armored against everyone. But I cared now, and it changed the terms entirely. "Aunt," I said, and I said it gently, because she had in her way been trying to save me for 9 years and had earned better than a cruel word. "Her name is Cecily Fell. She fought a runaway carriage with her bare hands rather than scream. She spent her last shilling nursing strangers with a fever no one else would go near. She told me the truth about Aubrey in a rainstorm when no one else in 9 years, including you, has had the courage to say a word about him to me at all. And it is the reason I have not ridden into a river since. She is the bravest and most honest and least grasping person I have ever met in my life, and she has refused me every single thing I have tried to give her, up to and including my regard, out of a pride I have never seen the equal of at any court. You may call her a cottage witch again if you like, but you will do it once, and never in my house, and never in my hearing, and never within a mile of her, or you and I are finished, aunt, and I mean that as plainly as I have ever meant anything." Lady Marisdale looked at me a long moment. She was not a stupid woman, my aunt, only a frightened one, frightened for the title and the blood, and I think at bottom for me. And she saw something in my face she had not seen in 9 years, a man with a reason to be careful of his own life, and whatever she had been going to say, she did not say it. "You mean to marry her," she said instead flatly. "If she'll have me," I said, "which is by no means certain, since she's turned me down twice already on general principle. But yes, I mean to spend the rest of my life persuading Cecily Fell that a reckless duke can be trusted to arrive home. If that costs me Miss Hartwell's coal and London's good opinion, then I have never in my life made a cheaper purchase." My aunt was quiet, and then she surprised me, as the fierce and frightened often do. Her mouth went not to a sneer but to something tired and almost tender, and she said, "Your father would have forbidden it. Your grandfather would have had the woman driven off the land." A pause. "But your mother would have liked her, I think. Your mother always did prefer people with backbone to people with rank. It's why she married your father, who had precious little of the one and a great deal of the other." She drew on her gloves. "Bring her to dine, then, before I go, if she'll come. I should like to meet the person who has done in a fortnight what I could not do in 9 years, which is make you afraid to die." And she went, and she was as good as her word, and she was even in the end, in her stiff and frightened way, kind to Cecily, which I never forgot. I asked Cecily Fell to marry me on the moor above Fen Bridge in December, on a clear cold day with no flood in the Arn, which ran low and quiet and innocent below the Mendied Bridge, as if it had never swallowed a road in its life. I had brought her up there on purpose, the two of us on horseback. She rode astride and badly and swore at the horse the whole way, and I loved her the more for it. And we stopped on the crown of the hill where I had come over that first storm evening and seen the yellow chaise running wild toward the water. "This is where I first saw you," I said, "fighting that carriage, not screaming." This is where two men left me to drown and one madman rode down a cliff to fetch me out, she said. I know where it is. I've dreamed it enough. She looked down at the quiet river and I saw the memory move over her, the cost of it, the nearness of the death she'd been so brave about, and I saw her let it go. Why have you brought me here, Gideon? I had never asked a woman to marry me. I had, in point of fact, spent 9 years arranging matters so that I would never have anyone I'd mind leaving behind. I made a poor job of the words. I said, because I've spent 9 years trying to give the road my life, and it wouldn't take it, and I understand now why. It was keeping me for something. It was keeping me for the evening you came over that hill in a runaway chaise so that I'd have, for once, somewhere I couldn't afford not to arrive. You didn't need saving, Cecily. You'd have found a way, you always do. I needed to save you. It was you saved me. And I have loved you since the first thing you ever said to me, which was to ask after the horses, and I would like, if a reckless duke has earned so much, to spend the whole of the rest of my life learning to be a man who arrives home. To you, if you'll have me. Which I know you may not, on general principle, and I've brought a great deal of patience and no arguments about rank, because I know how you feel about the rank, and I don't care about it either, and my aunt has come round, and your grandmother already calls me, that boy, as if I'm hers, and Gideon. And I'll wait, if you need me to wait, I'll wait years. I only wanted you to know that when I said I'd feel the lack of you like a lack of light, I meant. Gideon. She was laughing now and crying a little too, which I had never once seen her do for herself, only for the dead she couldn't save. You reckless, ridiculous, impossible man. Stop talking and let me answer before you talk yourself out of it. I stopped. She put her scarred, strong, capable hand against my cold face, there on the hill above the river that had nearly taken us both, and she said, I have watched a great many people die, and I have learned to have no patience at all with the living who throw themselves away. And I will not marry a man who rides into rivers hoping they'll keep him. She held my eyes. But I would marry tomorrow a man who's learned to ride home. Have you, truly? Because I couldn't bear it, Gideon, of everything I've borne. I couldn't bear to love you and then lose you to your own recklessness on some ordinary Tuesday. I couldn't. Tell me true, the way we only ever tell each other true, have you learned it? I learned it the night I carried you in out of the storm, I said. I have somewhere to arrive now. I'll not throw it away. I swear it to you on my brother's name, which I have not been able to say aloud in 9 years until you made me, and can say now, I'll come home, Cecily. As long as you're in it, I'll always come home. And she said yes. She said it plainly, the way she said everything, no flourish to it, just, then yes. Yes, you great fool. Yes. And she kissed me on the hill above the quiet river with the cold sun on us both, and somewhere in me the last of that 9-year stone lifted clean off my chest and was gone. We were married in the spring in the little church at Nethercote, not the great cold cathedral my rank called for, because Cecily wanted her grandmother close by the fire in a small warm place, and I wanted whatever Cecily wanted, then and ever after. Mother sat in the front pew and could not see the ceremony and did not need to. She said afterward she could hear in my voice that I meant it, and her hearing was the truest instrument in that church. My aunt came and wept, and pretended it was the cold. The village of Marston came, all of it, the fevered survivors and the widow of the old man we'd lost, bearing what small gifts they had, because the herb woman who'd spent her last coin on them was marrying the duke who'd carried the water. And Cecily walked to me down that short aisle in a gown that fit her at last, no dowry, no rank, cracked ribs long mended, gray eyes clear and steady, the bravest thing I ever pulled from any wreck, and I understood that a man may spend 9 years riding as hard as he can toward death and be turned, in a single storm, toward the whole of his life. We have 3 children now, and I have taught them all to ride, and I have taught them all carefully on ponies. Over ground I've walked myself first, that a horse is not a way to leave the world but a way to move through it, toward the people you love, and home again by dark. My brother Aubrey's portrait hangs in the hall where I can see it every day, and I can look at it now and I talk to it sometimes, and I think Cecily was right, that he never wanted the 9 years of punishment, that he'd have cuffed me round the head and told me to stop being a coward about being alive. I stopped. She made me stop. The county still calls me the Duke of Whitmore, but they've stopped crossing to the far side of the lane when they see me coming, and no one has called me reckless in years. They call me, when they think I can't hear, the Duke who married the herb woman, and they say it, most of them, with a kind of wonder now, the story having grown in the telling, of the storm and the flood and the man who rode down the cliff. Let them tell it however they like. I know the truer version. It is not the story of a duke who saved a herb woman from a river. It is the story of a herb woman who reached down into a 9-year wreck and pulled a man out of it, and asked, before anything else, whether he could be mended, and then, with her own scarred hands, mended him. I hear Corvo in the yard, old now, grey about the muzzle, and one of the children calling that Mamma's cart is coming up the Nethercote Road in the last of the light. I'll go down and meet her. I always do. I always come home,